Payara roadmap. We intend to do these sort of roadmap presentations about once every 2 or 3 months, just to give you an update. And so what I'll be talking about is looking at, first, I'll talk a bit about the enterprise and community split, which you may have heard about before. So I'm going to basically go a bit into that, explain the thinking behind it and how that impacts both enterprise and the community version of Payara. I will then again have a discussion a little bit about the Payara Open Roadmap and what we're doing there. Then we'll talk about Jakarta E9 and 10 and the Payara approach to supporting 9 and supporting 10. I've got a little section on about what's coming in the next releases of both micro and server. And finally, we'll talk a bit about upgrade and how you can approach upgrade. And basically, we're looking for feedback in this webinar about features that we got planned around improving the upgrade experience. And we'll be looking for ideas or thoughts around that if you have any. And so finally, that will move into the discussion period. Okay, so if I go into Payara Enterprise and Payara Community. So I don't know if you noticed, but recently we've rebranded our customer product as Payara Enterprise. Previously, we had different release streams, which you may not know if you're just an open source user, community user, but we've always had multiple streams of the software available for customers. So previously we had the community stream, which is released quarterly and has a quarterly sort of version number. And then for customers only, we had what's called the feature stream, which was a version of the software that was patched every month and basically followed the community stream software, but did monthly patches in between. And we also had what was called the stability stream, which was released at the beginning of the year. The first release of the year would then be carried on with just patches, no functionality updates throughout the year, and mainly really to provide a stable platform for production usage. There's always a balance that we're trying to find between innovation and rapid innovation in the community and feature streams, and for users who want stable production usage without new features coming in that may have bugs, to have a platform that they can upgrade and patch safely with knowledge that they're not going to get any regressions or they're not going to get any features that may impact on what they're doing. So having 3 streams was seen as the solution at that point, and we're basically moving to something which is a bit simpler and a bit more easier for our customers to understand. So we're moving to what's called the Payara Enterprise. So what we've done is we're trying to balance innovation and new capabilities coming into the platform alongside stability for production users. So what we've done is the community stream is moving to monthly releases, and that means we've had to change the version number. So because previously it was a quarterly, we've now changed it to the year plus the release in the year. And the reason we're doing this is one of the big drivers really is Jakarta EE9 and microprofile. These things are changing reasonably rapidly and are quite large changes. Microprofile, for instance, does breaking changes once a year. And Jakarta E9, when it comes, which we'll talk about a bit later, is a big breaking change to the namespace. So we try to work out how we can move towards these things more quickly, while at the same time providing stability for production usage. So going forward from the beginning of last month, what we did is we rebranded our community stream to be Payara Platform Community Edition. And like I say, that's going to be released much more often. So you'll see a lot more bug fixes coming in, and you will see a lot more change so that we can keep up with MicroProfile and their release cycles in a timely fashion. And we can start introducing EE9 capabilities quite quickly as well. So we felt for community that every 3 months was a bit too slow, and we wanted to bring more capabilities to the community quicker. And then what we're doing on the customer side, on the commercial enterprise side, is we're merging our feature and stability streams together, and we're calling that Payara Platform Enterprise. And this will basically release monthly as it did before, but we've moved to a more semantic versioning on the enterprise so people can understand, what is in any specific release. So we've gone through a major, minor, and patch version scheme. And basically minor updates will include feature changes, and patch updates will just be bug fixes. So that this gives people who are using enterprise in production certainty as to what's in each release, just at a glance, whereas it was a bit more complicated before. And the other thing we're doing in enterprise is making sure that upgrades from one to the next release are pretty seamless. And again, we're going to talk a bit more about upgrade later. So basically, what we do is from a engineering perspective, is that obviously Payara community and enterprise are both built from a lot of open source projects that we're involved in. So we're heavily involved in many different open source projects. So we have Tyra's OpenMQ, we use JBoss components, we use Corba, Grizzly, and all of these are in, a lot of them are in the Eclipse Foundation. We also are heavily involved in the Glassfish project, and we pull code from the Glassfish project in the Eclipse Foundation. We also bring in MicroProfile, Hazelcast, many things that we sort of bring in to produce a community and enterprise release. For Payara Enterprise itself, community is almost upstream as well. It's like an upstream project for us, because the way enterprise is working is that things will appear in community first. So we'll drive innovation through community edition, and then when we're happy that it's meeting the needs of users and it's ready for production usage, then we're bringing that into enterprise, and then we're packaging that up, and we provide obviously services around that as well to produce the enterprise edition. So this is a sort of change in how we're approaching with our engineering, and it's predominantly to look at how we can address the MicroProfile and Jakarta EE changes in a way that provides both innovation for those that want it rapidly, that you can get that from the Payara community, and combined with those that want stability, because we have to sort of deal with and handle both competing needs of different communities of users. So this is how we're approaching it, really, is we've changed our basically stream model so that enterprise will be the one that's focused on stability. So if you want the latest features and you want the latest development things to play with, then or to develop against, then they will come first into the community edition, and then they will more move into the enterprise edition when they are ready for production usage. I mean, the key point is both are open source. So, and enterprise will track community. We don't want it to get so far apart that you need to migrate from one to the other. It's just that things will appear first in the community edition, and then when we're happy with the functionality set, then that will move into the enterprise edition. So like I said, this is really to simplify and make it clear to different communities of users what each version of our software does, and which and which one to choose for depending on their requirements. So if I go into the roadmap, So we introduced a while back something called the Payara Open Roadmap. And this is on GitHub, and I'll share that in a second. So what we're trying to do now is open up the roadmap so that we can both make it visible to people, so we don't have to attend webinars like this, just to find out what we're looking at, but also to get feedback and ideas, and try and basically target the platform to what end users require. So, and this is both community enterprise. So we basically opened up our product management process to a large extent. So we created the roadmap on GitHub. I'll just share that. So this is what it looks like. So we basically got 5 phases that we're approaching in open source. Sorry, in our open roadmap. It's available on GitHub. It's on the Payara organization level, and it's just one of the GitHub projects. And essentially, we have some 5 phases of product management. The first is when we are basically, we have a layer where people are just collecting ideas, and when we select them for further elaboration to generate more requirements and maybe have webinars about or push out surveys and things to get feedback and gather requirements, then we put them into the selected column. We then have what's called evaluate, whereas we're looking at capability and trying to describe what the impact would be, how many users would be interested, is this a good thing to build? That's our evaluate phase. And then we have design, which is basically with the engineering team to actually work out how this is going to look from a product perspective, from a engineering perspective as well. And then we got build, which is things that are actually currently in our sprints, and obviously released is where we have released it into product and it's available for evaluation, and we're typically reviewing and evaluating. And this is where you'll see a lot of documentation and webinars about the functionality will appear at that point. So this is basically, I keep this up to date. I sort of manage the product direction, and I keep this up to date almost every Monday. I go through and update it against current status. We have things that are bubbling around below this board, and we have things that are enhancements that are very small, which will just be in the project on GitHub, which won't appear on the board. But this all gives you a general idea of where we're going. And I'll sort of got a couple of slides on each one of these. I mean, some of the things that we're building, which I'll cover a little bit more later, are we're doing some Docker enhancements, and we're doing some open tracing enhancements at the minute, ready for the next release. And then some of the bigger design pieces we're doing is around Kubernetes. There's two areas on Kubernetes. One is from Payara Micro, which is pretty solid Kubernetes support, and looking at building what is the reference architecture for Payara Micro on Kubernetes, and is there any gaps that we need to fill in just to work really well. So we see Kubernetes as a sort of first-class infrastructure that we need to target as a product, along with VMs and bare metal hardware in the same way. So we're looking at Payara Micro. It's quite simple, but for Payara Server, we're looking at what does a domain mean within a domain mode mean on Kubernetes. And you might have seen some Twitter polls around this just to get some ideas of how people are using Kubernetes, if they're using it at all. And we got some, exciting ideas around that, and we'll elaborate those no more. You'll see that coming out more in the next few months around polls and things around how we support domains on Kubernetes infrastructure. We're doing a lot of work on IDEs, which again I'll cover a bit more. And we're also doing a lot of work on monitoring console, which is actually released, but we're doing some enhancements around RAG status, which is red, amber, green status of the whole domain, and things like that to make that a lot easier. So these are obviously GitHub issues. So if you want to comment, then it's very easy to. Obviously, if you just click on one, it's a normal issue, and you can just add comments on here. And we basically keep these, like I say, up to date, and you'll be able to know what stage things are coming and where we are. These isn't all the things that we're looking at. I mean, if you go further up into the more sort of earlier stages, some of the things we are looking at, which I won't cover in this webinar other than now, is we're looking at monitoring. We've actually got a lot of monitoring and instrumentation within the platform, and how we integrate all that with ElkStack and Prometheus, and that's an area that we're going to spend a lot of time on. We've obviously built the monitoring console to visualize a lot of the instrumentation that we have, and one of the key things I'm very keen on is that, you know, when you choose Payara server or micro, you're basically choosing to have effectively a managed runtime for your applications. And then one of the things that we can do in a managed runtime is give you lots of visibility of what's going on. So a lot of the past few years have been building up tracing and metrics and monitoring, and the monitoring console is our initial stab at making that visible, and we'll be expanding that again, like say, to look at Grafana and Prometheus and other tooling. We're looking at auto tuning, request processing, and this will become. We'll also within that we'll be looking at Loom, Project Loom, which is lightweight threads, which may come to the JDK in 17. It may not, but we're looking at that sort of area as well. We've got some customer requests around making gRPC services as first-class components. So that would be basically integrate them within the full Jakarta EE so that you can use CDI and transactions and things. So that'd be more likely to be, let's say, for example, expose EJBs as gRPC, and we've got some customer demand for that. We're also looking at, and we know many people use Spring applications on application servers like Payara, so we're looking at providing a specific Spring deployment mode. And we're also looking at service mesh capabilities. So this is basically expanding the JAX-RS support to provide things that would typically be provided by a service mesh. So failover, high availability, load balancing of service calls. We think we can create something very simple just in the JAX-RS client that can deliver probably 80% of what you would get from a service mesh without the complexity. So we'll be building some of that into Payara server and the domain. So if you want to keep up to date, like I say, I keep this up to date every Monday. So, and things will appear and move around on the board, and we're definitely open for any feedback or ideas. And if you have, like I say, ideas for new things, please feel free to create them as issues on our Payara GitHub project. So if we go back to the presentation. So one of the things that was on the board was Docker improvements. That's coming quite quickly in the next couple of months. So one of them is there'll be a Payara Enterprise Docker repository that'll be for customers to download, obviously, Docker images of our enterprise product, and that's related to the open Docker Hub repository. The other thing we're doing for both is for the platform is optimize Payara micro images. We've got a project on at the moment that is looking at Payara micro, and in particular our Docker images to increase the startup speed. So Payara micro, unlike some other platforms that are targeting microservices, is it is Jakarta EE, Java EE, can run Java EE applications in full. So like web profile applications. So what we're trying to do is make this a little bit faster. We're already pretty fast, but some things that we're doing in Docker is we're starting to use OpenJ9 and its class data sharing to build a bacon image that has a lot of the class data sharing pre-warmed, so that when you start the image that it will start very quickly. Similar to that is we're looking at adding capabilities whereby you, during the build of your image, you deploy their application and you warm it up from a class data sharing perspective, and then you bake that into the Docker image so that the application will come back up rapidly. So, I mean, a naive way to build Payara micro images is to just run it with -- deploy, but that will deploy the application every time you start the Docker image. So this is looking at redeploying it and like warming it up. And then we'll have more documentation about how to build Docker images. So we're actually interested to find out, and you probably see some Twitter polls or other sort of mechanisms to get feedback on this. We're interested in how people actually build images. What surprised us is many people want to use our images sort of straight directly, whereas we always sort of saw them as an example that people would use to create their own images. So we're basically going to optimize the ones that we have to make it easier to use straight out of the box without any modification, and then also add more detailed documentation on how to build what we think is as an optimized Payara micro image. So if I move over to Jakarta EE, so Payara obviously is a Jakarta EE compatible application server. Payara server 5 is Jakarta EE 8. But one of the things we're heavily involved in at the moment is Jakarta EE 9. And as I said, Jakarta EE 9 has driven a lot of our community enterprise branding, and it's also given us a lot of drive to understand how we approach it. So one of the things about Jakarta EE 9 is effectively that the namespace is changing. So all JAVX APIs like JAVX.ejb or JAVX.servlet are all becoming Jakarta.ejb, Jakarta.servlet. So this is a breaking change for every application. And the initial release of EE9, where the first milestone is out now, and we were heavily involved in building that and moving Glassfish to the new namespace. The final release will be due September, October, sometime like that, depending on typical software release problems, but we're targeting September. And the EE9 is just including the namespace change. So a lot of it is what I would call as a tooling release. So it basically allowing vendors like ourselves and people who implement IDEs and things like that to actually focus on the namespace and how they're going to change it. So it's deliberately kept small in scope so that it can be released, within a year of EE8, so that we can then start building EE10, which I've got a little bit about. But essentially, EE9 will be a platform that you can use for testing migration. So we've migrated the Glassfish application server, and it was actually, I would say, less difficult than we were expecting, especially when we did it during the time when all the APIs were currently trying to do their releases at the same time. So that was complex. But I think for application developers, it's going to be quite a quick change, mainly just a search and replace. And basically what we're trying to do, we had a thought about how we approach this. Originally, we were looking at Payara 6 would be EE9, but we're thinking now that we will be bringing EE9 capability into Payara 5, and we're probably going to do that this year. The next release, we're looking to deploy some EE9 applications into Payara 5. But we're targeting 5 to be an EE9 compatible implementation soon after the release of EE9. And it will also support, at that time, Jakarta EE8 applications, which is your current JAVX namespace applications. So the way in 5, the way we're going to support Jakarta EE9 applications is we're going to use a project called Eclipse Transformer. It will basically take EE9 applications and transform them back into the EE8 namespace and then run them on Payara 5. This will hit the community platform first, and then Enterprise will follow when we have full compatible implementation. So the 5 server itself will remain on the DevX namespace, and it will use transformation to support EE9. And then when we get into Jakarta EE10, basically Payara Platform 6 is going to switch to the Jakarta namespace, but it will still support old applications on the old namespace as well. So we will support both, but this code base of 6 will switch to the Jakarta namespace. So Jakarta EE10, once we've got Jakarta EE9, then Jakarta EE10 will come out in probably second half of next year. And this is where we can now start driving forward Jakarta EE10. And I won't go into the plans of what's going to be in 10 because that's still open. But I encourage people to join and get involved in Jakarta EE if you want to sort of drive the direction of EE10, because that will be a quite rapid, well, it'll be a release about a year later. And there's a lot of work that needs to go into it. New innovation. We need to, from my perspective, obviously JDK 11 will be a baseline, or maybe even higher if the LTS is out by then. A lot of the specs need to be aligned more better with CDI, and then there'll be lots of individual specification updates to achieve that and to bring in new innovations into each one of the specs. And it's very easy to get involved in those at the moment. And then there may be some new specifications, either standalone or as part of the platform, for example, JNoSQL or MVC or others. Some of the micro-profile ones may make their way over or be included within EE10. So just a even further look ahead. So Payara 6 is what we'll be targeting as an EE10 compliant or compatible implementation. We'll still support Java E8 and below on 6. Again, we'll likely align this release date to the EE10 release. Java 17, which is LTS, should likely be out in the same timeline, so we'll be looking to support that. And if that includes Loom, then we'll be looking to support Loom as well. So, you know, that's quite a lot of stuff to do next year. We'll also be basically taking 6 and what we're calling kernel relayering, which is building it up to be more modular and smaller and faster and take some of the older pieces of the code out. And then we've got some interesting ideas, again, which you'll hear more of as the year goes on, around how we transform the current concept of nodes into more compute resource. And this will be to encompass technologies like Kubernetes, like containers and Docker, so that a node can be something that provides the capability to run a Payara instance. So that could be within a container, it could be within a pod, it could be an auto-scaled VM on a cloud, and that will basically, we're looking to re-architect how we deal with sort of compute resource. And so that what that will allow us to do will be to work better with auto-scaling technologies. It'll be able to allow us to start and stop through DAS, but controlling, say, Kubernetes or Docker or a VM on a cloud platform, and all that should be transparent. So we're basically reimagining what a domain means within new compute infrastructure. And again, if people have ideas or thoughts around that, then reach out to us. We will be doing webinars and as part of our open roadmap and feedback sessions to try and get what people want for a domain mode, which we still think has value in these new infrastructures. We've also got another exciting project around this, which is sort of driving our thinking, which you'll probably hear more about in a month or so. We'll be redoing the administration console, and we're also looking at re-implementing CDI and servlet implementations, because CDI we currently take from JBoss Weld, but from a Payara perspective, it's sort of a bit of a bolt-on. So we'd like to actually build that integral to the server, building on HK2, which is a dependency injection framework, which is actually the foundation of Payara, and we can extend that to be a CDI implementation. And CDI in 10 will probably be slimmed down and also targeting the needs of microprofile to be native compilations. So we'll incorporate that as well within Payara 6. So if we come, so that's a long way off, that's a year off on the roadmap. If we come down a bit closer to home, so Payara community in the August release, so this is the first, well, it's the first monthly release on the new community stream. We did have a community release last month, but this is the first one that's going to become within a month. And our target, again, all of these are subject to engineers being able to deliver on time, which is always a challenge. But these are the features that we're pushing into the August release, hopefully. The first one, we will have some EE9 support. So we'll be able to deploy some applications, have some capability to deploy applications in the new Jakarta namespace. The degree at which we can support it will depend on how much of the development work we get done. But we're targeting to, simple web applications in the first instance. So demanded from a customer is we're looking at extending open tracing support. So not many people know, but Payara server and micro have tracing support built into the server, so you can trace local EJB calls, REST calls, transactions and things in an open tracing format. We also support it across JAX-RS calls from client to server as well. What we'd extending that to remote EJB calls. So from a client to a server, we will do tracing across the process boundaries and expose that in open tracing. So that's a customer request that's coming into community. We again, I don't know how many people are familiar with the monitoring console that we're currently building in open source in community. We're adding more improvements for adding metrics into the graphs, and that will include microprofile metrics. We currently can, graph your custom microprofile metrics. It's just difficult to find the name of it to add it to a graph. So we're doing some improvements around that. We're also currently doing a bit of slimming down, and that's going into the next release. We currently ship with lots of notifiers and things, so we're currently taking them out for the 2020.4 release. But the intention is, when we go to our September release, is to actually basically revamp the notifier subsystem. Again, many people may not know, but we have an extensive subsystem that can track health of the server and raise notifications. And we're revamping that subsystem because it basically to make it easier to build your own notifiers and to then drop them into the server and them to be picked up. So what is a notifier? So for example, we have a health checker within Payara server and micro, where you can configure it to alert, if it's a memory usage is low, is high, JVM memory usage is high, or GC times are high, and then that will raise what's called a notification. And then we have notifiers bundled that will either send email or just log it, or they will push something to an alert into Datadog, or various different systems that can visualize that, or in our own monitoring console. So we're revamping that so that it's much easier to build and create your own notifiers and then drop them into the server. September should see release of our IntelliJ plugin. There's development going on in the repo on GitHub at the moment, and we're hoping to get that finalized, done, and dusted on September release. That will then be the last one because we've currently got Eclipse, NetBeans, and VS Code, and IntelliJ will be the last one, and that should be in September. We're also looking to certify microprofile as web profile compatible. I mean, one of the big differences for Payara Micro is it's obviously targeted at microservice container type deployments, but it is Jakarta EE compatible runtime, and that's what we want to prove by passing the TCK. We haven't done that previously, not because there's any failures, just because we haven't got around to it, because the TCK's in itself is designed for deploying to Payara server rather than micro type deployment. So we have to build some scaffolding around the test suite more than anything, which we're doing for the September release. And then there's more microprofile enhancements, more configuration sources, things like that are coming into the community September release, and we may support some of the new microprofile APIs if they come out and are released in this time frame. They're a little bit delayed, so that's September. So IntelliJ is the last one of our supports. Like I say, we're trying to make sure that all our IDE plugins have the same level of functionality. So currently we have VS Code, Eclipse, and NetBeans, and IntelliJ is currently under development in GitHub, and we just haven't done a release yet. So it has a lot of the functionality already, but we'd need to finish it off, release that in September. It will basically allow you to quickly set up a domain, build and deploy applications, debug them, and then work we need to do before September is allow you to also browse within the IDE, domain files like the domain.xml and the domain directory and those sort of things. So you can look at those within the IDE. So we're finishing off and polishing the IntelliJ plugin, and that should come in September.